Hi again then guys, and welcome to the last and, well, kind of least car review from the 5-car selection of the 1.34 update. And this one, let's be honest, it stands out like a sore thumb, even more so than something like the Mini Cooper did a few months back, because at least with that pack there were more cars to kind of hide it amongst, whereas with this one all of the 5 cars stand out because there are only 5 of them. This one, it doesn't have the pizzazz, it doesn't have the wow factor of something like a Le Mans winning McLaren or a Pagani hypercar, or of course the most significant car of the pack, the brand new Supra. This is the exact opposite end of the spectrum. Literally, it's not the latest anything, it's the earliest of something, the original MX-5, aka the Eunos Roadster, aka the Miata, whatever the name you want to refer to it as, it's the same thing. And this car shares something in common, wouldn't you believe it, with a Nissan Skyline. What on earth could the Mazda MX-5 hold in common with such a beast, beyond being Japanese? Well, of course, some of you will probably guess what I mean, and that is that the MX-5, along with the Skyline and a couple of others too, like the S2000 and, as I said, others, they became kind of a joke, a byword for having too many needless variations of a car in Gran Turismo, and that came to a head in Gran Turismo 6, where this car in particular was pretty much the worst in the whole game for that problem, having so many utterly pointless variations that nobody asked for or wanted. Very few people even bought all of them, let alone use them, and you could honestly make the argument that one from each variation and facelift would have been more than enough. It would have still been too many, but it would have been more than enough. I like what they're doing now. We've got one R32 Skyline, we've got one R33, we've got one R34, and so far we've got both ends of the Mazda MX-5 spectrum. We already had the very latest one in the game, and now we've got the oldest one, the 1989. I would honestly be happy if it ended up just like that. I wouldn't be surprised though if they do add another, maybe around the 2007 shape, because that was already a premium. For now though, I think it's a good choice of going from the very latest to the very first. It's a logical one to go for. So what does this car offer, given that it certainly doesn't have the torque of a Huayra or the power of the Supra or the prestige of the McLaren? Well, what it does have is similar to what the Lotus Elan had, or even the Lotus Elise, or the Vauxhall VX220, or the Triumph Spitfire. It has a package from a sports car point of view which does not offer a huge amount of power or even a huge price. It's a more youth-oriented sports car, but one which can still be enjoyed by people in their midlife crisis, or just somebody who wants to buy a sports car in general on a budget, because it proves that you don't need to have a ridiculous amount of power to have a lot of fun. And the MX-5 was kind of the successor, the spiritual successor, if you will, to something like the Triumph Spitfire, because that car was released for the exact same purpose. And I think that Mazda have actually done very well in staying true to that. Through all the years and all the facelifts of the MX-5, it has always represented that. It's never tried to become a 300 or 400 horsepower super sports machine, as some other sports cars have tried to over the years with rebranding and new versions. It stayed true to itself, and I have to respect it and respect Mazda for that. Now what the car offers is pretty good. It's got an engine which is a little bit bigger than it easily could have been, a 1.6 litre. It's got a healthy 117 horsepower, which of course doesn't sound remarkable in the grand scheme of things, but that's enough for a smaller sports car, especially when it only weighs 940 kilos. That's very little. And the torque is also more than enough at 101 pound-feet. The price tag, it's dirt cheap. 17,000 credits is nothing. You can buy that after like a couple of beginners events, if that. And the horsepower per tonne is actually even better than the power, because of course it weighs less than a metric tonne. 124 horsepower per tonne is very impressive for a small car that doesn't have a huge amount of power to work with. Even the performance, it's actually really good. Through corners in particular, the handling is great. You barely have to do any tuning to it. You don't even have to do any actual upgrades. You can just tweak the racing suspension and the diff, and it immediately is responsive. And that's one of the great things about cars which are actually fairly underpowered in the grand scheme of things. You can really feel any kind of change that you make to the tuning immediately, especially when it comes to cornering, because with a car that's so slow anyway on the straights, it's through the corners where you'll see much more of a difference in the kind of time you can shave off of a lap, and that's certainly the case here. Now, in terms of its usability, I haven't actually tried to race this in, for instance, N100 yet, but I have no doubt whatsoever that it's going to be a useful car. Maybe not the fastest thing out there, but useful nonetheless. It could certainly have the potential to take on certain K cars. I wouldn't expect it to be quite as quick as something like the Honda N660, but it could take on some others, and it could certainly take on something like the classic Porsche 356 or the classic Mini, because what the Mazda has is, in a similar way to the Honda, a good mix of handling and very healthy straight line performance for its power, whereas some others, especially classics like the Porsche and the aforementioned Mini, they tend to struggle more in that regard. They have great cornering to the point where the Mini is insanely good around the Nordschleife, but they just don't have the straight line and in particular top end speed. Whereas an MX-5, it's actually not bad. The aerodynamics are pretty good, the handling is already good, and what it can do with the power and torque is very healthy. So although an MX-5 is never the kind of car that I will personally get excited about in any sense, it is a sports car that I certainly understand the purpose of. I respect it for staying true to itself, and Mazda for continuing to evolve its success and make sure that it stays relevant. But at the same time, the true genius of the MX-5 as a concept for a production car is that it's managed to change so much over the years without actually changing at all. And that is a genius thing, not just from a sports car perspective, but from a business perspective. If you can keep repackaging the same thing and convincing the customer that they should buy it again, but also delivering a product that doesn't make them feel shortchanged or swindled, that's a difficult thing to do. Apple, for instance, does not manage to do that. Their phones do not feel like they needed to have these new higher prices considering what they offer. They get slowly better. The MX-5 didn't need to essentially get better because it was already really good. The power has barely jumped any higher than it originally was, the weight is still similar to what it always was, and even the price in comparison to its rivals has stayed very, very good. The value of an MX-5 is impressive, and I would say that this one, in its classic form, just has a certain charm to it, which, although the subsequent versions did a good job of still capturing, even up until today, there is something more charming about a classic, kind of smiley, anime-faced Eunos Roadster or Miata or MX-5, whatever you want to refer to it as, that the newer ones, simply because of their age, don't really have anymore. It's a cute car that actually happens to be a pretty healthy little performer, not just a pretty face for the sake of having a roofless car. So overall, definitely worth a look for lower level racing. The handling is outstanding. You could drift it if you wanted to, it is rear wheel drive after all, but overall it's a car which is certainly worthy of your attention. And of course, stick around on the channel for more tunes and reviews from cars in Gran Turismo Sport, including all of the updates in coming weeks and months. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.